Hello, happy August. Let me tell you about the books I read last month. I was camping at the start of July and I didn't want to take a book with me that I was worried about getting slightly bashed up. And bless it, this copy of The Lost World is already showing its age a little bit. The Lost World is by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who also wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories. I've read, I don't know how many there are, I've read a good few of those, but it's been a while since I read anything of his, and this is quite different. Sherlock Holmes never had to deal with dinosaurs. Unlike Ed Malone, our main character in this story, he is a journalist, and he is inspired, after he is rejected by a woman that he likes, to be more adventurous, to take more risks, and to do something big with his life. This leads him to a pretty controversial scientist called Professor Challenger, who is known for two things. One, he has an extraordinary temper. He is not a pleasant man. Two, he has come back from an expedition to South America claiming that he has found evidence of a place in the Amazon that is home to some pretty remarkable creatures. And almost everyone has dismissed this and said he's making up for attention or he's not well. No one believes him. And this big debate comes up again. And Ed ends up on an expedition with the professor and two other men to find out once and for all whether there is any truth to the professor's claims. I don't think it's too much of a spoiler, given that this is the cover, to say that this place is real. And they do get there. So a fair amount of the book is the travel part of it and them tracking down this location and getting to it and seeing all these animals for the first time. But obviously, these creatures have been evolving happily on their own for millions of years, and they're not used to people. And it wouldn't be a dinosaur adventure story without some chase scenes and some dinosaur-based peril and near misses and gory injuries and boys firing guns to scare off the dinosaurs. This is a very old school boy adventure story if you're looking at it that way. There are two women that speak in this story, I think. Arthur Conan Doyle was not writing this book for women. As a modern woman, I enjoy an adventure and I could enjoy parts of the story, the travel parts and the suspense of it. But he wrote it for boys. It's a boys' fantasy. But in essence, it's quite a simple adventure story with some dinosaurs thrown in. It's not just dinosaurs though. The boys on their adventure are not the only primates in the area. I won't say more than that, but that becomes more of the plot as the story goes on. Their encounters with these other animals, a bit more like themselves. And that plot point brings me on to the biggest issue with this book. Obviously this was written a long time ago and people had quite different views. I thought I was just going in for an adventure story. I should have known. The group take some indigenous people with them as guides, and the way they talk about them and the way Arthur Conan Doyle writes about them is not great. There are some terms that we really can't be saying anymore, and again with these other primates that they encounter amongst the dinosaurs, that's all very sort of this idea of humans are the ultimate species, we're sort of higher than everything else. Anything not human is kind of primitive or stupid or not worth as much. And again, it's very interesting reading it and thinking about how normal that was as a view. But yeah, some of the language in this is a little bit uncomfortable. If you take those bits as sort of an interesting commentary on attitudes at the time, the rest of it is a fun adventure story. It's not super complex, it's the boys go on an adventure and the boys come back as heroes from the adventure. But yeah, I had fun reading this. And then, for some complete contrast, I read a contemporary novel, and that is The Last Library by Freya Sampson. This follows a young woman named June who lives in a village, a small town, somewhere quite remote, and she is the librarian. Her mother was the librarian at the same library before her, and she was like this legendary librarian. Everyone in the community loved her, and June has taken over after the death of her mother, and she's trying to live up to it, but she is very shy, and she doesn't feel like she's anything like her mum was. She's quite sort of stuck in the past. I think she's sort of late 20s, maybe 30, and she doesn't feel like she's done enough with her life. And then they find out that the library is one of several being considered for closure by the local council. And this kicks off a story of sort of a community group coming together to try and save the library. June making these new friendships and sort of finding the strength to fight for something that she cares about. And I thought this was sweet. It's nothing groundbreaking, it's sort of fairly predictable, but it was comfortable. If you love books and you love libraries and you like a story about an unlikely group of people coming together for a cause, this ticks all of those. I enjoyed the fact that June made friends with people of different ages as they were all trying to save the library. There was a teenager, there were several older people. I don't think you see enough friendships between sort of young adults or teenagers and elderly people, and that was all done well, that was sweet. A couple of things didn't quite work for me. There are a few plot points that I thought either didn't make sense or could have been done better. June as well, her main personality trait is that she's very shy. And I'm very shy, and I appreciate a shy main character. But certain things about her, being shy doesn't mean you don't know anything about the world. There's a point she ends up at a party and they start playing Never Have I Ever, and she has never heard of it. And she's my age, roughly. And I don't know if there's anyone my age in this country that hasn't at least heard of that as a concept. She's like, what is this game? What is everyone talking about? I have never heard of it. I just read books. And she was maybe a little bit sort of 1900s shy woman rather than contemporary shy woman, and that I didn't love, but I do appreciate a shy main character who still gets stuff done. There is a romance subplot in here for June as well, and I thought the love interest was very sweet. I could see how they worked together, but it's a classic, all their issues were things that just could have been solved by communicating properly. So if you hate a romance with miscommunication everywhere, this has a fair amount of that. I accidentally set myself up on a bit of a theme this month because I started with The Lost World and then I read The Last Library, and then next I listened to The Lost Bookshop by Evie Woods. This is set largely in and around Dublin and it follows two different timelines. In the past we follow Opaline, who is a young woman who ends up becoming a book trader, and in present day we follow Martha and Henry. Both Opaline and Martha have run away from situations in their life. Opaline was about to be married off to someone she had no interest in marrying, and Martha has escaped temporarily from an abusive relationship. Henry is a PhD student who is fascinated by books and is on the hunt for a bookshop that he has seen mentioned once somewhere, I think, but there's no other record of it. And books are his thing. He's also into the Brontes, and he's trying to find out whether this bookshop does exist. And in the search, going to the address where he thinks this bookshop should be, he bumps into Martha, and that begins their friendship and their relationship. And from there, in both timelines, we follow these people as they look for answers and uncover secrets and try and stop the past catching up with them, which doesn't go as well as they'd hope. In the present timeline, Martha and Henry are navigating their developing relationship, and we also learn that they are a lot more linked to Opaline and her story than they realised at the start. I don't even know about Opaline to begin with, but it's all sort of linked and everything comes together at the end. Now, from the blurb of this sounded perfect for me. I love books about books. I love books about bookshops and people who love books. I love kind of gentle mysteries and a bit of historical fiction, and I did really enjoy this one. I listened to the audiobook and the narration was great as well, and I had a thoroughly good time with this one. I will say, I read the blurb and I was like, oh cool, it's going to be like speculative magical realism because there's this talk of this vanishing bookshop. And then that was kind of the only thing mentioned for a while that seemed out of the ordinary. So I was like, oh, maybe it's just kind of mysterious. Maybe there isn't any magical realism in it and I misunderstood. But it is magical realism, and that comes into it a lot more in sort of the last third of the book, I would say. And I would have liked it if that had come in earlier, because it felt kind of like a book of two halves where then suddenly all this whimsical stuff was happening, and I really enjoyed that. I just would have liked more of that at the start. I did also slightly struggle with Henry as a character. There were points where he was very sweet and he and Martha were very sweet together, but sometimes I didn't love him. Not to spoil anything, but in the early parts of them knowing each other, he isn't completely honest about himself or his situation, and I don't like that. I know it comes up in a lot of romances and things are dealt with a lot more respectfully than in others. There's no big cheating story or anything, but he is a bit of a fibber, and I didn't love that. But I think that's a me thing. Do just want to note the premise and the cover make this look like a very cosy book, and overall it is, but it does cover some less cosy things. I already mentioned there is an abusive relationship, there is a talk about the Irish asylum system, there's also some violence I won't put into context because that will spoil things. Yes, don't go into it expecting everything to just be whimsical and lovely, but overall it was a very whimsical and lovely book. Next up was this beautiful hefty book. This is This One Summer by Jillian and Mariko Tamaki, and the author and the illustrator of this book are cousins, which I absolutely love, especially given that this is a book about two girls with a very close friendship that kind of resembles a family relationship. In this we follow two girls called Rose and Windy who go on holiday to the same beach every year with their families. They go separately, but they met when they were young and now they're like holiday best friends. And there isn't a massive amount of plot to this. It is kind of a slice of life. It's a look at this particular summer and the things the girls get up to and the things that they're observing about the people around them. Some things happen with their family and the local kids in the town. It's mostly sort of observations about growing up, about how their friendship is changing and how they are each changing, and sort of how they're looking at life and the future. So it's not massively plot driven. It is this just kind of glimpse into one of their summers together. And maybe I'd have liked a bit more plot to it, but hang on a sec. Can you begrudge a book when it looks like this? This is just stunning. The whole book, the artwork is just beautiful, and that was my favourite thing about it. It was just sort of a pleasure for my eyes as I was reading it. And I think if you go into it knowing that it's more about the characters than huge events, then it delivers that perfectly. I think one of the things the writing of this does best is capturing that kind of awkward early teen period of your life. I think Rose is a year or two older, and seeing the difference as she's becoming a teenager and kind of half feeling lost and half feeling like she's got it sussed and she knows who she is and she knows how life works. She understands all the grown-up things. I thought that was done really well. Again, looks soft and gentle and beautiful, and he is quite a lot of the time, but does also deal with a couple of things that might be quite sensitive. So have a look at that before you pick this one up if you think you might need to. I can't go a month without a middle grade, so next up was Gargantis by Thomas Taylor. This book is the second in the Eerie-On-Sea series. It's the sequel to Malamander, which is a very excellent book. And in this series we follow a boy called Herbert Lemon, which is such a good name, and he is the lost and founder at the Grand Nautilus Hotel, which is this huge hotel in the town of Eerie-On-Sea, which is this strange town that's nice in summer but then kind of run down and creepy in the winter when all the tourists leave. And Herbie's job is looking after the lost and found booth in the hotel. It's his job to get stuff back to the people who have lost it. And in the first book that involved finding a girl called Violet, and she has become his best friend and his partner in all their adventures, and she's very much back in this one as well. And the drama in Gargantis kicks off when a glass fish-shaped bottle washes up on the beach, and this big argument kicks off about who has the right to it. And Herbie takes it because it's lost, and that's his job. And this all spirals into this big thing about the bottle. You've got several different magical creatures, you've got a lot of adventures in boats and on the sea, and you've got the same quirky lot of characters from the first book plus some new ones. And I enjoyed this, but not as much as Malamander. I was slightly disappointed that it felt quite similar, and that sounds silly for a series. You want them to feel similar, but the plot felt too similar. Their main issue for a lot of the story was that they were avoiding an ominous, mysterious man who wanted something from them, which happened in the first book as well, and I'm not sure that it was as fun the second time because you've kind of seen it already. It plays out differently and it ends very differently, but that I would have liked something completely different to happen, I think. But I still had a good time because Thomas Taylor is such a great storyteller. His narrative style, if you're at all interested in books for children in terms of reading or writing, Thomas Taylor does such a good voicey first-person narrative. Herbie has so much personality, and the way it's written, it really comes through. Herbie is very funny and you get his thoughts on everything that's happening, and he's completely mastered writing this character, and that kind of saved the fact that the story wasn't as exciting as I'd have wanted it to be for a sequel. Sticking with the audiobooks, I listened to Trouble by Lex Croucher, and in this one we follow a young woman called Emily who is taking up a job as a governess at a big fancy house for a posh fancy family. But it's not meant to be her job. It's meant to be her lovely, delightful sister's job. Her sister who is polite and kind and great with children. Emily hates children. Emily is a compulsive liar. She's not great with people in general. But she needs the job because Amy is sick and they need money. So she is like the anti-Maria von Trapp. And so we follow Emily as she tries to get by in this job for as long as possible, this job that she was absolutely not built for. And she gets to know the other staff at the house who are a lot of fun. And then there's the family who she has come to be the governess for. Naturally, the father is a very handsome widower, but things don't get off to a great start with them. And then there are his children, one of whom is a ray of sunshine and is determined to be best friends with Emily from the moment they meet, and the other who is quite the opposite. And there's some mystery going on. There are some things that we slowly find out about certain characters. Emily gets herself into a fairly dangerous situation in her quest to make as much money as she can to help her sister. She makes some pretty poor choices. She sets herself up with a kind of shady character, and that, as you'd expect, doesn't pan out very well for her. But largely this book is about Emily's relationships with all of the different people in the house, and I thought for the most part that was done very well. I enjoyed this. I liked how everyone spoke to each other. I liked all of their different characters. I thought they were all written very distinctly. This felt like it went up a step in Lex finding their writing style. They're very, like, you can pick up a Lex Croucher book and you know from their humour and their storytelling, but this one felt like they've really kind of settled into it, and that was really nice to see, having read all the other books and been like, yeah, I really like Lex's writing, and then reading this one and being like, aha, they're like comfortable in it now, if that makes sense. And I think Lex does a great job of balancing these big topics like gender identity and homophobia and class, while also making a book that feels like a Georgia Nicholson book for grown-ups, and I think that's a pretty skilled thing to be able to do. I think possibly the pacing wasn't quite balanced across the book. We spent quite a lot of the start on Emily getting to know the children of the family and only having sort of passing interactions with the father, and so that relationship, the romantic part of the book, which from the cover you're kind of expecting to be the main thing, that kind of went along quite gently to begin with and then had to go quickly at the end, and so you didn't get that feeling that they had this relationship built up. But overall, it was a fun time. All of Lex's books are a fun time. If you like The Sound of Music, but you want it kind of turned upside down a bit, and she's not going to pull out a guitar and sing a nice song with the kids in this one. So if that sounds like your jam, there you go. And I finished the month on a book I have owned for many, many years and was sort of too daunted to ever start, and that is Lord of the Rings. I love fantasy books. If I had to pick one genre to read forever, it would be fantasy, and this is like the fantasy. This is what kicked off the genre and let it become what it is now. And I'd never read it, which is bad, but just like, this is the first third. I think for a while I thought Lord of the Rings was a series, like the films, but this is the first third of the novel, and it's just big. I just got big book fear for like 10 years. But I had tickets for the very last day of July to go and see Lord of the Rings the musical at the Watermill Theatre. And this is a show I'd heard a lot about because it came to London. It was super expensive, it looked beautiful, commercially it did terribly, and I was so intrigued about it coming back. Also the music is incredible. And I thought I really ought to have read at least the first part before we went to see the show. And so that's exactly what I did, and that's exactly why I'm not going to talk a huge amount about this here, because I'm going to do a whole video about reading this and seeing the show. But I do just want to say I am glad I've read it now, and it's nice to understand what people are talking about when they talk about Lord of the Rings in terms of the books. And yes, there is a lot of walking and a lot of chat and a lot of deciding whether or not it's time to sit down or have a sleep, and a lot of descriptions of the ways roads turn and where hedges start and finish. But it's a classic, and the characters are great, even if there are hardly any women. But I am very glad I read it. And that's where I'm going to leave it for this month. I will see you next month with August's reading. In the meantime, have a great month, happy reading, and look after yourselves.